In today's video, we're going to talk about the importance of keeping your draw length. That means maintaining the amount of distance that you've drawn back before you come into anchor, and how that can directly affect not only your timing or how much effort you have to exert to set the clicker off, but more importantly, your grouping and your potential scores. A little bit more in depth about what I'm talking about is, if I lose my draw length, if I come forward at any point during the entire draw cycle, not just as I'm coming into anchor, it dramatically affects the performance that you're capable of, the consistency that you're able to shoot, and the grouping that you're able to shoot downrange. So I'm going to show you what I mean on how to properly keep your draw length first, and then I'll show you some ways that you can lose it. And ultimately, I'll show you what happens when you do lose that draw length and how difficult it is to maintain a consistent shot process when you lose the draw length. So I've got a camera set up here, as you can see, that will be watching my clicker. So that way you'll be able to see what I'm doing when I'm actually shooting, and you'll see my clicker position, so you can be a little bit more precise as to the level of detail you can see there. And I've already got a setup here. I've reviewed this bow, actually. I just posted a video. It's the Sebastian Flute Neo. And I'll have links in the description below and a card at the top up there in case you haven't seen it. But essentially, I reviewed the bow, but I had to have the clicker in a very far forward position that I could possibly put it, but it's still not quite far forward enough. The draw length is a little bit too long for me, and so this will give me a great opportunity to show you what happens when I don't maintain my draw length and how my timing can dramatically suffer. So the timing is the time it takes to get to full draw and anchor and settle in, and then start to set the clicker off, like how much time it takes for me to execute the shot to get the clicker to click before I let it go. So timing is that window from full draw to starting expansion to the clicker clicking. Timing needs to be consistent to be accurate and consistent under pressure especially. So if you're not on top of your game as far as your draw length is concerned, you'll have a hard time maintaining your timing. So this is a great bow for me to show you on because it's a little bit too long of a draw length for me, so it's already a bit of a struggle. So as I shoot a couple of shots here to warm up, pay attention to the clicker position or the arrow position relative to the clicker, and notice just the progression of how I draw the arrow back. And pay attention to the progression of the arrow continually coming back, ideally. Because I am warming up, that may not be the case, and the super long draw length, it may not be the case either, but I'll do my best to do it correctly. And so what I'm trying to do, besides warm up, is just to maintain the position that the arrow is in, to not let it go forward in space. I'm not necessarily worried about it continually moving. What I'm more worried about is preventing it from moving forward. Shoot one more arrow for warm up and one more arrow doing it correctly. Okay, well, I hope I did it right. I hope that arrow never went forward relative to the clicker at any point during the draw cycle. What that does is it helps make sure that I'm maintaining the tension in the direction, the muscle tension, the engagement of my back, the engagement of my forearm, the continuous motion, whatever you want to call it, whatever you think is important and what's nice for you to think about. I maintained that and never lost any of those potential options. So let me lose my draw length at some point during the draw cycle, so that way you can see what I'm talking about before we talk more in depth about why it's important to not do that and how you can avoid it yourself. So right as I come into anchor, I will lose the draw length, I will lose the tension I have built up in my back, I will lose my tension in direction, or I'll be losing momentum, or I won't have a continuous motion through the shot. So as I come into anchor, I will lose my draw length. At least that's what I'll hope to do. and you could see how much longer it took me to set that clicker off. I don't know if you could see it, but I could feel an extra level of effort or intensity that was required to set that clicker off, and I still couldn't even maintain that timing. I'll do it one more time so you could see it again, and I will lose my draw length again as I come into anchor. And it just requires a whole lot more effort and energy to still set that clicker off. The reason this is as you draw back, you're building tension into the system. Back tension, arm tension, finger tension, whatever you want to call it. You're building up kinetic energy into the system. And if you let the bow win and you lose your draw length, you shorten the distance that you've pulled back, you've lost the tension that you've built up in the system. As you go to restart that, later on to execute and set the clicker off, it makes it that much harder because you've lost that tension and that distance, and you've lost the direction of the energy that you're putting into the system. Without losing, you can maintain that timing much more consistently and have a much stronger shot in the end. Ultimately, this losing of the draw length can happen from a multitude of factors, either being too careful for whatever reason, potentially slowing down at the wrong times, paying attention to too many other variables, or giving something else more intention to think about. And that's normal. The last thing is normal, to potentially be working through form changes and have your draw length be lost at certain points in the draw cycle because you're thinking about how it feels to anchor or something along those lines. And eventually over time, as you get better and more comfortable with your anchor, you can focus more on maintaining that tension or the distance or the draw length that you have built up in the system. So what I am trying to do is to lock into position as I hit my maximum draw length before I come into anchor, so I don't lose the distance that I have built up, the draw length that I've built up. So as I draw the bow back, once I get into this position here, I lock it and I keep the tension, I keep the draw length, and as you saw, the clicker just clicked before I've even come into anchor, because I'm actually trying to continually increase the draw length by ever so slight amounts. Because I found if I don't try to slightly increase the tension, and I do actually truly just try to maintain it, due to muscle fatigue, I lose the draw length because I'm just saying keep the tension, but I'm losing because my muscles are getting tired, right? So I actually mentally try to increase my draw length ever so slightly, increase the back tension, increase the arm tension, continually move and never stop as I'm coming into anchor, and then all the way through, even transfer, expansion, and obviously through release and follow through. I do not ever, under any circumstances, maintain tension. I always am adding, because if I don't add a little, I will lose it. I'll do it again correctly for you here. Timing was good, the shot broke okay, and overall, it wasn't that bad of a shot. Now, if you're interested in learning how to set up your draw length properly, I will have links in the description below and a card at the top up there, because I've already set up a video on how to make sure your draw length or your clicker position is set up properly. So if you haven't yet, I'd check that one out in addition to this video, because obviously you need to make sure it's set in the correct position, because again, you want to make sure the system is working for you and not against you. Now, let me do it again where I lose the draw length. As you can see, I'll be careful as I come into anchor. For whatever reason, some people will draw the bow back. Sometimes the clicker will click before they come into anchor, especially if it happens in a tournament. Nobody wants that to happen because you don't want to have to let down when you make a mistake. But then they make a mistake by being a little bit too careful as they're coming into anchor as to not set the clicker off, and then they lose the tension, they lose the direction. More importantly, they lose the draw length, and then the timing goes out the window, and good luck being consistent. So I'll be too careful here coming into anchor. And it's just so much more effort required to set that clicker off. Timing goes out the window, and especially if you were to have that habit of either losing the draw length or potentially being too careful as you come into anchor. I'm guilty of that, by the way, especially under pressure. it really dramatically affects your timing. So that's why, if you've been around this channel long enough and you've heard me talk about this, you'll see that I visually check the clicker before I come into anchor, because I'm making sure I maintain my draw length and I'm not losing it as I'm coming into anchor. It's an old habit I built up a long time ago because I had that tendency under pressure to sometimes either be too careful coming into anchor or rush coming into anchor and not fully achieve what would be almost holding or almost draw length maximum before I come into anchor. So you just saw me being too careful, and now I will rush getting into anchor without making sure that I really maintain that draw length and make a mental effort to keep it. And I'm not sure if I lost my draw length there at all, but it definitely was still hard to get through the clicker because it was a little bit shorter than it should be, because I didn't really make sure that I locked into full draw almost before I came into anchor, locked into the position of almost maximum draw length before I came into anchor, and either I lost it or I just set up too short because I rushed it, and as you could see, the timing just didn't hold up. So how you can apply this at home is to just simply try to maintain the draw length, maintain the tension. In fact, you may want to try to add a little bit of tension, add a little bit of draw length as you're coming up into anchor. So I hit the load, I hit the maximum draw length position roughly, and then I maintain, if not increase slightly as I'm coming up into anchor, to make sure that I keep my draw length. So that way when I start expansion, it happens consistently, it happens expectedly, and it's really consistent from shot to shot to shot. And if I do my job right, I can do it better under pressure, and because of that, I can shoot higher scores than my competitor, especially if they're dealing with that type of issue. It's super common, so don't get down on yourself if you're losing your draw length or your tension in direction as you're coming into anchor. It is super important though. If you can do this, it will dramatically affect your overall shooting, and it will make you much more consistent from shot to shot, and your timing will be better over time. So I'm going to do it one more time, shoot a better shot the right way, and end it on a good note. Nice and quick timing, really easy to set it off. Overall, less effort required to actually shoot the shot, despite having to exert more energy earlier in the shot to maintain that draw length. Not just energy physically, but mental bandwidth as well. But what it results in is a really crisp, clean shot with relative ease of setting the clicker off without being too intense or having to exert too much to make it happen. And the timing was quick and consistent, time and time and time again, if I do my job correctly.